All right, so that's behind the cloud. And what? That is weird. So the mountain's behind the... Laskavu prosimu, druzy moji. In the last lesson, I did a little bit of drawing in Grease Pencil, introduced a little bit of the interface, but we stuck very much in 2D mode. It was just some basic lines, basic strokes and fills, all on a flat surface. But of course, we are in Blender, and of course, we have all the benefits that brings. 3D space, cameras, depth, and so on. This is where Grease Pencil gets very interesting and also a bit confusing. Chodimo. Here is the key idea for today. A Grease Pencil object is 3D, but the strokes inside are ordered, well, just like Photoshop layers. It's just 2D. Grease Pencil is 3D on the outside, but it's 2D on the inside. And if you don't understand that, well, things can start to get a bit weird. Let's say I want to draw some mountains for this cloud to live in. Quickly scribble a mountain. And here's the important part. I deliberately forgot to make a new layer. So I've drawn this mountain in the same layer as the cloud. And by default, Blender places new strokes on top of your previous strokes. And that's what makes drawing in Grease Pencil or any other 2D drawing software feel natural. If you were painting, for example, you would expect your latest strokes of paint to go over the ones that you've already painted. And it's just mimicking the real world in that way. So right now, the mountain is sitting on top of or in front of the cloud. No problem. I'm in 3D. I can fix it in 3D. So if I hop into edit mode, and I'm going to select this mountain stroke, then move it back on the y-axis, G, Y. Now it is definitely further back in 3D space than the cloud, so we're good, right? Well, let's orbit around a bit. And yeah, something is off. The mountain is still somehow in front of this cloud. What's happening here? Even though the mountain is behind the cloud in 3D space, as we saw, Grease Pencil is still respecting the stroke drawing order inside that layer. In Blender's mind, it's thinking you painted the cloud first on this canvas, then you painted the mountain, and just like in the real world, you paint successive layers one on top of the other. Inside a layer, stroke order wins. The last stroke is drawn on top, like in the real world. And that applies even if you do what I just did and you move a stroke, apparently, in 3D space. That is the nub of the problem. Of course, in the real world, you can't, on a piece of paper, order things, move things around in 3D space. Here in Blender, you can, and that clashes with how we expect things to happen in the real world. It's not a bug, it's how Grease Pencil works. But how do we fix it? Well, we can help a little bit by changing the 2D order. So in edit mode, select your stroke, this mountain. I'm going to go to the stroke menu up at the top, arrange, center back, or I can do that with a right-click menu, right-click, arrange, center back. And now for the moment, the mountain appears to be behind the cloud. The 2D order is kind of matching the 3D space a bit better. But in fact, we now have the opposite problem. Look, if I orbit all the way around, the mountain stays permanently behind the cloud now, which again, it's not what we'd expect. It's the same paradox of 2D layer ordering in 3D space. So just to be clear, Grease Pencil decides what's in front in two different ways. There's layer order, so over in the data tab or down at the bottom in the dope sheet, those are the layers. And of course, top layers will draw on top of lower layers. And then there's the second way, the weird Grease Pencil way, which is the stroke order inside a layer. And then you've got to think like Adobe Illustrator or something. Newer strokes draw over the top of my older strokes. So if something looks wrong, just ask yourself, is this because of 3D, some 3D issue, or is it a 2D layer ordering issue? Of course, maybe a better solution here would be to put the mountain on its own layer, as I demonstrated in the last lesson. So Data tab, New Layer, give it a name, and of course make sure it's beneath the cloud layer. And now in Edit mode, select the mountain stroke, press M, and move it into that layer. Now I've separated foreground and background in a slightly more logical way. It's an easier way to work. I can edit these things independently, but it still hasn't fixed that 2D in 3D problem. Watch this. If I orbit around once again, you can see it's still happening. To really fix this, so it would behave like I would expect something to behave in 3D, we'll have to hop up to the object level and make a completely separate grease pencil object. To speed things up, I'm just going to duplicate this whole cloud object. Call this one mountain. And with that grease pencil object selected, I can just delete its cloud layer. And the opposite thing goes for the cloud object. Select that, then delete its mountain layer. And now if I hide the cloud object, you can see that's now a separate thing. Now let's see what happens if we orbit all the way around. You see, that has fixed it. The reason for that is that at the object level, Blender is treating these grease pencil objects as sort of standard 3D objects in 3D space. Now I want to look at something else that can be a little bit confusing. If I select the cloud and in draw mode, draw another cloud just off to the side a bit. Now, if I orbit here, just notice that it appears on exactly the same plane as that first one. Now, how was that decided? How does Grease Pencil decide where it's going to draw? Well, it comes down to these settings at the top. Look at this stroke placement here. Right now it's set to origin. That means Blender is pretending there is a flat canvas sitting at this object's origin. And now all new strokes are going to be drawn on that same plane. If I switch to object mode, you can see that origin dot there. That's the little orange dot. And when I enable canvas up here under the Grease Pencil overlays, you can actually see that drawing plane represented here by this little grid. Every new stroke lands somewhere on that plane, could be miles away to the left or right, but it's still parallel flat on that same plane. Right, next to origin we have drawing plane, and by default it's set to front, that's the XZ plane. If I toggle between that and side and then top, you'll see the canvas is rotating to match. Now if I switch to view and orbit around a bit, well, now the canvas is always facing my point of view. No matter how I orbit, I'm drawing on a plane directly facing me. That's incredibly useful, but it's still always just a flat plane. So what if within this cloud Grease Pencil object, I want a few more clouds and I want to set them up at different depths in space? Well, we can use the good old 3D cursor. I'll open a second viewport. In this new one, I'll look from quite a top-down angle. I'm going to turn on the 3D cursor overlay here. Maybe turn off the canvas overlay, in fact. And now if I use the shortcut Shift right click to place the 3D cursor, take a look at the other viewport over there on the left, and the drawing canvas is jumping to align with that cursor. So now I can place those clouds at different depths predictably. One viewport I can use to control the depth, and the other is where I do the drawing. But remember, new strokes are always going to cover up your previous strokes. So there's actually no point in placing that 3D cursor behind anything which I've already drawn. You've got to think like a painter. You've got to draw the background first, move your 3D cursor in front of that, and then draw a foreground element, and so on. That said, this is more like drawing in 3D space with a bit more control. So to sum this up, just remember a grease pencil object is a 3D object, but inside it's its own little 2D world, and that has an effect on the way that the strokes are ordered. So if something looks weird in the viewport, you just got to ask yourself, is this a real 3D positioning problem, or is this down to stroke order? And finally, if you have quite a big orbiting camera move, which for obvious reasons you're probably going to want to avoid with a 2D format like a grease pencil drawing, well then separate grease pencil objects are probably going to be your best option. Once you understand the logic of it, grease pencil stops feeling weird and it gets liberating because look, you can just make a world by scribbling it. Well, once again, thanks a lot for watching. Do zустрічі! If you want to get deeper into 3D, check out my courses on 3dfromzero.com. There's a free one. Thanks for watching.